Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand as usual, and it is perfect. Okay. Big day, big day. If you're on the mentorship list, a little FYI, I'm going to be sending out an email today with a huge monster announcement for you, something we've been working on for a little while. That actually includes my business partner, Mike Robertson. And so you're going to be wanting to look for that because there's going to be something that's very, very special for you guys that are on the mentorship list. So if you're not on that list, I would suggest you get signed up very, very quickly. Also, it is Wednesday, which means that tomorrow's Thursday, so tomorrow's Chips and Salsa Day. So I'm really looking forward to that. Now, to the Q&A. Today is going to be all about the wide ISA, if that's okay with you, because I got a question from a couple people that have gone through the intensive, Monica and Justin, and they had a question about some wide ISA strategies. And so I wanted to go through a few things that I think might be helpful for you from like a self-diagnosis standpoint and from a training standpoint. And so first and foremost, though, let's kind of look at what we're up against here with the wide ISAs. And so I got out my little thorax thingy here, and I'm going to show you down the line. So what we're typically looking at with the wide ISA is the expansion from the medial to lateral, and then so we are narrower from anterior to posterior. And so under these circumstances, we don't get a lot of turn. We'll see a lot of compressive strategies. The initial bias with the wide is towards increased internal rotation and a loss of external rotation. But Justin and Monica had questions about what about when you lose the internal rotation. So let me grab the pelvis here and I'll show you like a nice little representation of the pelvis. So under most circumstances with the wide ISAs, and if they don't have full breathing excursion, then I'm going to be looking at a situation like that where I'm going to have the nutated sacrum, I'm going to have the IR ilium, and that would normally point the acetabulum forward and into an anteverted position of the acetabulum, which gives you lots of IR. However, if I'm losing that IR, that means I've got a compressive strategy anteriorly. So the front of the pelvis is getting pushed backwards, much like the sternum getting pushed down, so the pump handle would probably be down as well. So that means I'm going to start to lose shoulder internal rotation, and I'm going to start to lose this hip internal rotation. And so when we think about wides and we think about training strategies and such, we want to consider this shape first and foremost. So what we need to do is we need to create some strategy that creates that anterior expansion again. It brings the pump handle back up, moves that pubis forward. And so one of the things that we can do is just flip people onto their side. So we're going to do a lot more side lying activities. So this would be somebody, if you think about like one of your standard gym activities that people love, planks for some reason. This is somebody that would not put in a prone plank position that would be symmetrical, because all it would do is reinforce this compressive strategy. But if I move you into a side plank position, because all the internal organs fall towards the ground based on gravity, we get this nice little anterior posterior expansion under those circumstances. So if we were just to say that we're doing planks, if I was going to do a wide, I would put them in a side plank all day, every day. Because again, the gravity gives us this mechanical advantage of gut position. The other thing that we have to recognize is the fact that we don't have very good turns. And so again, bilateral symmetrical exercises tend to not be advantageous when we're trying to create the anterior posterior expansion on a wide and restore their turn. Exception to the rule may be one of my most recent posts where I was talking about recapturing hip internal rotation with a modified Camperini deadlift, followed by the wide stance heels elevated deep squat. The wide stance heels elevated deep squat can actually help restore internal rotation for those wides that are showing limited straight leg raises, probably at least below 70, but probably more limited than that. And you'll see a return on investment in hip internal rotation under those circumstances, because what you got there is a situation where the musculature below the level of the trochanter is actually concentrically oriented and limiting the internal rotation in that respect. So again, that would be one of the exceptions to the rule for bilateral symmetrical. Typically what you're going to want to do though is you're going to want to emphasize split stance orientations, single arm pressing and pulling, because when we're pushing and pulling with a single arm, we get a compressive strategy on one side and an expansive strategy on the other. And that's how we're actually going to start to restore this turning element. When we think about the two sternums, yes, you have two sternums, you have a right and a left. When I compress on one side, I'm going to compress the pump handle on one side, which will allow expansion on the other side. On the back side of the thorax, I'm going to get a reciprocal expansion compression under those circumstances as well. So again, I want to use unilateral strategies when I'm trying to create expansion for my wides. Also posted today on Instagram a little strategy to keep that posterior expansion on the backside for those of you that do perform a lot of bilateral symmetrical exercises and are probably biased towards a wide ISA. Very useful strategy as well. Another great self-test is the back to wall flexion test. That's also up on YouTube, so you can actually get to see that. If you are limited to such a degree that when you put your fingertips against the wall with the elbow pointing straight ahead and you can't get past 90 degrees of shoulder flexion without the deviation of the elbow outward, then you know that you are compressed below the level of the scapula, and you need to go to the most recent Instagram post and get that posterior expansion where I show you bending over the glute ham to expand the lower posterior rib cage, because that's going to be your first step. I would also do the heels elevated bilateral squat under those circumstances to try to reestablish expansion in that area first, because if you don't have expansion there, you'll never get the pump handle to come up, because ultimately we got to get the pump handle to come up to get the internal rotations to come back. So expand the posterior lower rib cage first, then go after pump handle. The way you go after pump handle is through the unilateral pressing and pulling activities. So make sure you're addressing the reciprocal strategy, and again, when you're trying to create that AP expansion. So hopefully that gives you a little bit. You got a couple of tests. You got the back to wall shoulder flexion test. You got a straight leg raise test that are going to help guide what your priority should be. And then you've got this unilateral reciprocal strategy in regards to your training. So apply those. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below if we're looking at this on YouTube. And I'll get back to you guys later this week.